Hi, I'm Autumn Keynes with Virtually Connecting, and we're doing something a little bit different here. We're doing a missed conversation with Laura Gibbs because we were supposed to connect with her and some stuff happened and we're not able to do that. But we decided that we're going to leverage the technology of our time and our day to have that conversation anyway because we can do that. So I'm going to start off with letting Laura introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Laura. I teach for the University of Oklahoma online, but I live in North Carolina, so I'm using the power of virtual every day at my job.
Awesome, thank you. And then we'll just have each one of the people who are joining us virtually to introduce themselves, and I'll just kind of call you guys if that's okay, starting by how people are listed on my screen. I'll start off with AK.
Hi everybody, my name is AK from UMass Boston. I do a lot of things, but in general, I'm an educational troublemaker. Good to be here.
And it looks like George was able to join us. Hey George, what's up? Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, do we have volume? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Hey, I'm George Station. I am a first-year seminar lecturer at Cal State Monterey Bay.
Awesome. Thank you, George. Harriet?
Sure. I had to unmute myself there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm Harriet Watkins. I am the Director of Online Learning for the newly formed University of Arkansas System eVersity. So we're a 100% online university within the system, and we're the first of its kind in the state of Arkansas to be a system school. So that's where I am. It's a gloomy day outside, but I'm glad to be here with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Harriet. And Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa Hammersheim, and I'm from just outside of Chicago. And I'm actually here with my small dog who is currently playing with a very noisy toy. So if you hear anything in the background, that's her going crazy. But yeah, I'm a graphic designer and design educator, and I'm a doctoral student also studying kind of the intricacies of art and studio learning when they go online. So.
Very exciting. Hey Phil, can you give us an introduction?
Yeah, just had to unmute myself. Volume, everybody good?
Yes.
Cool, excellent. Phil Denman here from San Diego State University. I'm the coordinator of faculty support, which basically means I do whatever needs to be done to help faculty develop blended online learning, things like that. UX consultant on the side, formerly a product developer, wear a lot of different hats within the realm of digital online learning and just product development, things like that. Curious about everything. Love hearing everything that you guys always have to say. I'm a huge lurker online, not as big of a participator just due to time constraints and the fact that I'm usually on at 3 a.m. But just love learning from the community here for sure.
Thanks, Phil. How about you, Rebecca?
Hi. You can hear me now. Rebecca Hogue here. I am, what am I? A co-founder of Virtually Connecting, but I'm also an associate lecturer at UMass Boston. I teach a couple of courses, an introduction to instructional design and another one on the design and instruction of online courses, so very meta. And I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Ottawa studying the effect of illness, breast cancer blogs in particular, on patient education.
Awesome. Good work there, Rebecca. Susan?
Hi, I'm Susan Adams, and I'm from Oregon Health and Science University. I'm their faculty development specialist as well as their instructional designer. And I'm the senior instructional designer with focus on the fully online RN to BS program. And I also just started blogging about 5 months ago, so that's how I'm here, and really interested in the topics around digital citizenship and the hybrid pedagogy whole community, for which what got me here. So I feel very emergent, but highly curious and just excited to be party to these conversations, so thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. And I think that's all of our virtual participants, so we will jump into the conversation. And I know there was a lot of folks who I don't know, were thinking about like maybe they could only make half of this or whatever, and they were like, can you ask this question for me? So I just kind of want to back away and sort of say, if you got a question, go ahead and just throw it out there.
Okay, I can get this party started. So I have a question for Laura about, you've been teaching online for a long time. Actually, I think you started teaching online while I was doing my master's online way back when. And I was just wondering, so what advice would you give to students today who are just learning how to teach online or how to design online courses? So especially if they're designing for other people. So what advice would you give in that area?
That's a question that I get asked a lot, and I kind of back away from it in the sense that I don't think so much about the courses, but more just about how to be yourself online, right? I mean, the teacher, the student, we all need a way to be here online. So for me, being here on the video is kind of strange. That's not how I'm usually, making my presence felt online, but there are all kinds of ways you can do it, right? People can connect through video, they can blog, they can use Twitter, and at least for me, the more I've built up that online presence so that I can really share myself, who I am with my students, then the course can go however it needs to go. It's not that different from, all the other kinds of choices you would make designing a course for the classroom, but you need to be there somehow. When you walk into a classroom, you're there. There's no doubt about it, right? But online, how are you there for your students? How do you make them feel like they can go and find you and know that you're there? And so that's something I really recommend to people is start a blog, develop a Twitter presence, do something so that your students can find you online, not just through the email. The default is that, oh, I'll email the instructor. That's not the best way to be yourself online. So that would be my main piece of advice, I guess, and it goes in all different directions.
So am I hearing you say that maybe it's not so much about course design as it is about online and digital identity?
Right, or digital presence, identity, the sense that your students know you're there. Over and over again, I get asked by people if my classes are somehow impersonal, which is the strangest possible question for me because it feels so personal. I'm there for my students actually 40 hours a week because I teach full-time online. And my students are there when they blog, when they share with each other, when they share with me in those online spaces that we create. And we can do whatever we want with those online spaces in terms of the course, but you need online spaces where people can be themselves, whether that's blogs or Twitter or here in the video. And just to say something kind of provocative, I think LMSs are not a good place to be yourself, right? It's very hard to show who you are, be who you are in a space where you don't get to make a lot of choices about that. Although, I mean, there are instructional designers here in the group. How do you all work with faculty on that, the ones who want to build and be themselves, be the teacher in that LMS space? We're just about to switch to Canvas at my school, so I would love to hear what kind of successes you all have had with helping people build an online presence in an LMS, if it's possible. Is it possible? What do you think?
Laura, we've been really focusing on the community of inquiry because I've been getting into the weeds around not just the online, but how do you actually show up in an asynchronous forum? Mm-hmm. So within the LMS, we're having deep conversations, and in fact, they're doing it right now in the other room. We had a great discussion this morning. Talking about, how do you show, for example, a student's bias, right? So they might come in and have a really strong opinion about vaccinations, and they might be showing evidence therein, but, the faculty talked this morning about saying, okay, I hear your opinion, part of that makes me feel uncomfortable, and that's a good thing. Let's flip it on its head. Does anyone else have another opinion? And they talked about that being presence. And even getting into the weeds of what kind of languaging, what kinds of ways do we actually show up, what do we even say in an asynchronous forum to show that kind of presence and to keep the conversation going. So my faculty are kind of at that place of figuring out how do we actually show up in the languaging on these forums, which may be veering off from what we're speaking to today, but part of what we're looking at.
Well, and that idea of conversation and how do you make it happen and how do you make it real, that's something I struggle with too, because I use blogs as my main space. I don't really use the LMS. And then how do you turn those disconnected individual blogs into a conversation. And that's something I've worked on a lot, what kinds of activities you built in so that the students are interacting with each other in that blog space, because it's very different from a discussion board space. And one of the things about a discussion board space I've always found so hard is how do you keep track of the individual person from discussion to discussion, you know, to get a sense of their personality and how they respond to this question and that question, and then 3 weeks later another question. To me, that's what's really hard about discussion boards. There's not that continuity of person across the space the way there is with a blog.
This is probably overkill. When I taught online, when I teach online, one of the things that I've done is use Evernote to copy and paste on a week-by-week basis important findings from students. I used to do a podcast every week with interesting like really important things that students said but may have been lost in the thick of it. So I kept things in an Evernote notepad so that I could have notes for myself, and that's how I developed a sense of who the students were from week by week. But of course, if you have a class with 20 or more students and the discussion forums are really active, that's 100 or more posts a week. That's a lot of copying and pasting and annotation of these discussion forum posts. I had a question, and it's about blogs and having students use blogs. I've always made it an option for my classes online, but very few students take me up on it. And I feel comfortable with blogs, obviously, but I'm feeling reluctant to just drag students in kicking and screaming. So is there some sort of onboarding process that makes it easier for them?
Well, it's something I drag them. They're not really kicking and screaming, because at least with my students, they're mostly college seniors. Most of them haven't blogged before. And they're really glad to have someone show them how to do it. So the eagerness factor for me has been really high. And I came up with just a fun, simple blog assignment to do as a kind of icebreaker, which is favorite places post. So they set up their blog, they can choose their own platform, Blogger, WordPress, doesn't matter to me. And then they do a post that I call favorite places, where they find at least one picture of a place and talk about why that place is important to them. And so it's a good way for them to see right away the power of being able to use images in the blog posts. And it's also a super simple assignment because everybody has favorite places, and sometimes they come up with really creative responses, like I sometimes get students who are about to get married or just got married. It's like, my favorite place is next to my husband or next to my wife or with my kid, and then other people are doing their study abroad places. But it's great. I mean, they do that first blog post, and by and large, they're really hooked because they realize this is a space they control. It's about, like I was saying before, their presence, who they are, something that's really important to them, and it has an image or a video or music in it, and that is a huge plus for my students in terms of the blogging. They really like the chance to work with multimedia stuff. So not a lot of kicking and screaming, honestly. I mean, if I said to them, you can do this if you want, most of them probably wouldn't say, oh, I want to do it, but once they're given the opportunity to do it and then connect and share through the blog space, it works great. So that's been my experience anyway.
I've been challenged with, and I teach in different aspects. So last semester I was also teaching an intro course on digital literacies. And in that course, I didn't design it, I was just following someone else's design. My students were required to create a blog at the very beginning, which for me, I have an ethical issue with that one. I think we have to teach about online identity and privacy before we ask students to be in public space, so that they understand that they're in a public space. But once they got in there and they all got sort of, they got into it, they got into their biggest aha moment was Feedly and RSS feeders so they could find stuff. That was really cool to watch those aha moments. But what I found very difficult was creating community among my students. So where in the discussion forums, I can bring small groups of students together, or I can create, there's ways in which I can sort of foster community building, where in the blog space I find it very difficult, and partially because students write a lot more in the blog space, and so that they're longer posts, which means they're harder for more students to read about all of their colleagues. They won't, and it's, yeah, so it's kind of an interest, and they don't have an easy, the LMS easily tells you what you've already read and manages all that kind of stuff.
The way I've worked with that is to put students at random, totally at random, and so that's kind of fun, like who am I with this week, in little groups of 3. And I switch that up every week, and so gradually they cycle through most of the class, and then they choose a person in addition to the random groups so that they can return to visit someone they've gotten to know, or they can make it their goal to meet every single person in the class. My classes are kind of big, like 50 or 60 students sometimes in my mythology class. And using that randomizer has been great because it means it takes no time for me. It's just a few minutes to set it up, but I can be confident that everybody is getting a chance to meet everybody else and to experience those blog spaces to see how different they are, to learn about how they can configure their own blog from seeing other people's blogs. But it's taken some work. I mean, I really had to think about how to turn that into a network space as opposed to just a bunch of links, say. Silent.
We do a lot of peer-to-peer reviews, and also we have our students facilitate a weekly forum discussion. So, you know, if we have 60 students in a class, and this will actually be within the LMS, they're broken down into groups, and in those groups they are required to facilitate the weekly forum discussion, and they rotate that role each week. And it highly increases engagement, and they also peer review each other on that facilitation.
Right.
Yeah. With a rubric that's already given to them ahead of time.
Yeah, I spend several weeks helping students learn how to respond to each other about their writing. I teach writing. And so the students who've been in like art courses, like I'm sure Lisa is familiar with this, they really get the idea of feedback and what it's like to give honest, detailed feedback. But for a lot of students, it's the first time they've ever commented on each other's writing. And so I built, I guess it's 3 weeks of exercises to help them prep for that by critiquing their own writing and also just sharing ideas about what commenting works for them. And I save that from semester to semester, so I have this whole mountain now of student comments about commenting, and that really helps a lot too.
And I think students, I like appreciating actually thinking of the LMS as the little training wheels for them to then go out into the larger world. So if they have a prescribed forum assignment they're facilitating and they spend weeks doing that, we can do what Jessie Stommel does, which is go on a digital field trip. And that's the next step that I'm actually going to be presenting on this afternoon, is asking the faculty, what would it be like if we had your class go on a digital field trip on Fridays on Twitter, which would require you to create your own personal learning network and to advertise it, and you know, and because none of them are on Twitter, they're terrified of it. So we have a long way to go, but it would be interesting to just seed that idea. Because they've also said to me, we lose touch with our students after they graduate because they don't get the email anymore. And I said, but if you were connected with them on Twitter, you've got a long-standing, lifelong connection. And they all went, I want to be on Twitter now. And that's got them. I mean,
oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I was just having a long Twitter convo this morning with a student from last semester. It really works. It's great. We don't use Twitter for class, but they know they can find me there. So it's a great space to interact and connect with after the class, even though I don't use it so much as a class interaction tool.
We're using discussion boards in much of the same way, having basically students go out and use it as a scavenger hunt space, a place to go share resources, find things that relate to their world. AK mentioned, do students really read all the posts? Resounding no. We look into the data behind Blackboard, and no, students do exactly what we tell them to do, whether they have to respond to 2 posts. Guess what? They're reading 2 other posts. If we tell them to read 4 posts, they're reading 4 other posts. If we tell them 1 post, they're reading 1 post. If we tell them none, none. So knowing that standard kind of call and response isn't really working in the online discussion, we've moved into kind of a mentality where we're using that space to share bits and tidbits from their life. So we have a religious studies faculty member who has students find a music video, a meme, an animated GIF, or something like that that connects to the student learning outcomes every week, and then they tell why it connects to the student learning outcomes. So one of our student assistants comes to me the week after the class ended. She said, "You'll never believe this assignment," which I helped design. I spent 4 hours last night going through all these music videos trying to find the right hip hop yada da da. And I said, Dominica, we tricked you. Like, that's exactly what we wanted to do. Is we put you in an environment where you were going through YouTube, you were going through Giphy, all those other places where you're already living, and then bringing that stuff back to the classroom. And she said, well, that's like one of the most important assignments she's ever had in a humanities class, because it actually let her go into her world and bring something into the religious studies discipline. So I really am getting away from the idea of doing, like, you know, post a discussion and respond to two colleagues. I think that that's totally not what students are looking for. All the feedback evaluations we're seeing is that it feels trite and forced, and that's not really how discussion happens in the classroom either. The discussion happens organically and naturally, and to force people to respond to other people who they're not seeing, they're in a different time and a place, it seems totally bogus to me. So we're really pushing people away from that, and just saying, use that as an opportunity to share things and comment if you want. You know, basically, we're giving you some participation points for it, hoping that some type of interaction that takes place there, but we're doing it on a holistic way. So essentially, in my class that I teach online, instructional design, I say you can get plus or minus 10% based on your participation, and that's based on how many times you log in and all this other criteria. But it's a crapshoot. It's show me that you're active and you get your 10 points. Show me you're not active and you don't get your 10 points. And it's not like a, you know, check all these boxes off the list and get a grade. It's be a contributor and get the points that you're supposed to get. So it's a really weird thing, though.
One of the things it's George. I'll be quiet.
Oh. No, I was going to, it's just a quick follow-up on that note about, you know, people being engaged, staying engaged, and so on. So I guess my question, are you okay? Is there feedback or something going on, or are we okay?
It's good.
Okay. Okay, so I guess my question on the, you know, the contributions, they don't really, you're finding students are responding well to not having the fine-tuning, I do this and get X points, I do this and get Y points, etc., but just to leave it a general, you contribute, you get the points, you don't contribute, you don't get the points. I got some pushback on that, but you know, it's maybe different ages, different maturity levels. I'm mostly with freshmen who are just getting past the K-12, you know, the worksheets and all the other stuff that comes out of K-12, unless they're Montessori or something, right? So that's I guess my big issue is letting them know that they're not in the cage, if you will, that they were in, and that it's okay to contribute and go more organic. They're still kind of looking for check boxes and so on. And so a good part of my time seems to be freeing them from that. I'm wondering if you all have thoughts on that, either maturity level or age range, where it just kind of clicks and they go, yeah, I just want to have a chat with colleagues about academic stuff, which seems to be true at the master's level, at least for some of you, but I'm not sure about undergrads. And I'll mute to listen because I think there's some other stuff going on here.
I worry a little bit about fairness in assessment if I'm not very specific about how many things that they need to respond to, because I'm very big on wanting to be very clear to students up front how they're going to be assessed for the course. And I hate the grading system, but we're in a grading system. And I can't, you know, even if I do mastery grading, I can't not be in that system. So I'm sort of stuck with the, you know, I'd love them to organically participate and participate for learning's sake and learning's sake only. But I struggle with the, I still have to give them a grade at the end of the day, and I don't want it to be a biased grade. I need it to be based upon some evidence that they knew the first day of class. Does that make sense?
No, I'm with you absolutely on that, and it's really a difficult thing. We've really moved more into a qualitative assessment of discussions and things like that versus the quantitative, knowing that the numbers of posts doesn't necessarily reflect engagement as well as the quality of those posts. So I would say we're using kind of a 75-25 split, where 75% of that is really outlined as the qualitative nature of contributions, and 25% is on actually the clicks. Have you viewed more than one person's discussion board. And we actually have a couple of rubrics outlined where it does give some standards of minimum criteria to meet. You must have at least engaged with 5 different colleagues across the course of the experience, or you must have participated at least 10 times over 16 weeks or something like that. So we have some kind of baseline of participation, but above and beyond that, we really look at the qualitative component, because I would rather hear every other week or every 3 weeks a really insightful tidbit on the discussion board than, yeah, Julie made a really great point, I agree with that. And so many students get into that kind of mentality of they're just writing a sentence to fulfill that requirement, to check that box, that you have to kind of shift it, or at least that's what we're working on, is shifting that away from, well, how many words did they write, or how many times did they post, to, okay, versus how deep were those posts, or how many words were their biggest post, what was their largest post of that, and how many people are they really connecting with. But you're absolutely right, Rebecca, it's a really tough thing, given that, yeah, George is also right that they come from this K-12 environment where everything is checked and everything is graded, and that's what they're working towards. That we have to almost re-teach them how to learn, and that learning is, it's okay to be an autodidactic. It's okay to go off and learn things on your own and contribute in that way, and not be told what you need to learn. And so many freshman students, to George's point, don't get that. They think they're just there to fill a seat and check a couple boxes off the list. So that's tough.
One way to also do that is to go to a rubric, which I could kind of go a little bit meta in being able to say, for example, you're going to be graded on whether or not you keep the conversation going and offer new perspectives, right? So kind of going back to, let's think about what are we asking them to do, and is their leadership behaviors being demonstrated during their time as the facilitator of the group? That's an interesting parameter or to think about, right? That starts to get into leaning into that possibility of emergent discovery and providing that as a driver by putting the rubric in front of them that has languaging to that end. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for the classes that I've taught, I've used the discussion board rubric that's out of 100 points, or out of 10 if you just lop off the 0 at the end. And I used that for a number of years, and I think that people were nickel and diming points. So I think what I'm going to try this summer is use the same rubric, but if it's above a certain threshold, it's a pass, and if it's below a certain threshold, it's not a pass. But there's still an option for feedback, and the feedback is what's more valuable to me to give, because then I can go into the weekly gradebook and say, this is a check, you've done a good job, here are some additional things that you can consider, or sorry, this is an X, you didn't do a good job, here are some things you can improve in subsequent weeks, and then look at the, I don't know, it's a 13-week semester, it's a total of 16 discussions, so if you do 12 out of the 16, you get an A, if you do 10 out of 16, you get a B, and so on. So make some optional. So you have a quantitative component and then a qualitative component too.
Yeah, I've taken the approach that you're describing there, AK, and it's worked really well for me, where it's about setting a minimum, like Phil said, and making that minimum really clearly defined, like Rebecca said. And then beyond that, it's feedback from me, feedback from the other students, intrinsic motivation that makes them spend that 3 or 4 hours looking for just the right video. And putting that extra oomph in a given week into a given project. I teach writing, and so revision is naturally a part of it. And I don't want to say you got a C or you got a B on this and you need to revise it. I don't do any grading, none, 0, none. The students do all the grading themselves, which is just checking to make sure they did the minimum. But the feedback, the revision is continuous over that 15-week period, and it's powerful once you take away that fear of grading, anxiety grading, I'm done because I got an A, lackadaisical attitude because of grading, and just look at the idea that we've got 15 weeks to work on projects, to revise and revise and revise until you come up with something excellent. And a big motivator for that for me has been the archive of past student projects. So in the first week I say, look at this. Here are hundreds of projects that people have done for this class in the past, and the students are kind of staggered because they've never made a website before. They often don't know anything about publishing multimedia online. They're insecure about their writing. They've never maybe even done creative writing since first or second grade. But you show them those past projects, and you don't say, this is what you have to do to get an A. You say, this is what you get to do in order to have something awesome at the end of the semester. To me, that's way better than dangling a grade carrot. It's saying, look at what these other students did. Are you excited? Do you want to do something like that? How can I help you? That's the approach I've taken, and it's worked really well, especially online where I can interact with the students one-on-one and help them exactly in the way they tell me they'd like to be helped.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, go ahead, Lisa.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say I can jump into that too, because it sounds like teaching art and design is a lot like teaching writing with kind of the iterative process. And I find with my students one of the hardest things is to just get them to trust themselves to participate and to engage, because for many of my students we have written forum requirements for discussion, and I mean they're visual people, they're creatives, and their writing skills may or may not be all that great. And so they find, like, I've tried to free them up as much as possible so that it's not just like write something, respond to 2 people, check it off the list, but like share and kind of engage. And so I feel like for me, like one of the big things we always try to do is talk about, you know, I trust you and I trust your vision, and you know, we all need your vision more than we need you to essentially copy something off a website and paste it in the discussion and then cite it. You know, so I mean, I think that takes a little bit of, I think it just takes time in a lot of ways to, you know, have them feel like, oh, it's okay, Lisa's fine with me doing this, the community is fine with me being myself, and you know, we can kind of progress that way. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to just kind of watch as it builds throughout the course. But, yeah.
And that's why I asked about the continuity of discussion boards. One of the things I really like about the blogs is that the students can chart their progress in that iterative way over time, week by week. Like they'll do a end of week reflections post, or they'll accumulate their best of posts by labeling them best of, or they'll put a video playlist in the sidebar of their blog. So if they're collecting videos or something, they can put all the videos they've collected right there, so when you go to their blog you can see it in the sidebar. And that sense of continuity and progress and accumulation is something that I really like, and that's hard to have happen in a discussion board. But a blog, oh my gosh, you look at a blog after 15 weeks of blogging 4 or 5 posts a week, it is a very impressive body of stuff, and so people are proud of themselves, and they're also impressed by each other when they visit each other's blogs.
Well, going back to that idea of digital identity, if I'm participating in a discussion board, when I get ready to go back, when I think about, oh, remember that thing and I had that discussion, I've got to go back through all these threads. Right? It's not like, oh, this is my area and I designed it and it represents me, and so I know the post that I want to go to, and I know it was a comment on my post. It just makes it a little more personal, and so I think it does make it easier for you to reflect and go back to it.
The reflection posts are actually the ones that I read every week in the students' blogs, because they're the most fun. They're the most sort of engaged in terms of letting me know how well the class is going. And that's something that's optional, because I definitely see what Rebecca is saying. You know, some students are very hesitant to put much of themselves online, so if they just want to put, you know, their story for the week and their notes about their reading and not do anything that's especially personal, that's totally cool too. The class works either way, but some students really appreciate that space and want to learn how to use it, and I enjoy that a lot because I get to know those students better. It's like in the classroom. Some students you get to know better than others, and the blog is a space that is flexible that way, like the classroom is.
And I do think that there is maybe a space for the LMS. I don't know about the discussion board in general. A lot of times I think maybe we're using these tools the wrong way. You know, I think that a blog has a certain use and a discussion board has a certain use, and I think an LMS has a certain use, and I think the LMS's strong point is that it's private, right? But I mean, it's not that we want to be private all of the time, but a lot of you know that I'm getting ready to teach this digital citizenship class, and going back to something that Rebecca said earlier, that, you know, having those conversations with students before you put them into a public sphere, I think is really important to get them ready for that. And so I'm going to be meeting with them face-to-face for the most part, so we can have some of those conversations, but I could totally see in an online environment I would maybe want to start those conversations in a private space and then move them to a public space.
I want to throw a thought. Sorry, I was going to throw a thought out here about the place for the LMS, because one of the challenges, at least at one of the institutions I teach at, is that students lose access 3 weeks after the course. So very shortly after the course, they lose access to everything. So in some ways, the LMS is the place for the throwaway conversations, the conversations where students need to have them to learn, but they're not the things that students need to take with them later on, where the blog might be, and this is just sort of came to me as we were talking, but the blogs are more the space for the things that students need to take away. And I totally agree with Laura that the best reading as an instructor, I love reading student reflections on learning and student reflections on things. They're the easy things to read, but also they're individual, because I really hate reading summaries that are the same. It's like, I don't need 20 students to read, regurgitate the same 4 points about the article they just read. No. I want you to put it into a context to make it interesting for everybody.
Yeah. The way I've dealt with that, just to put in a plug for things you can do online that are hard in the classroom, is to open up the choice of reading. So a few years ago, I redesigned my mythology course, so there's 100 different units for people to choose from. So every student is designing literally their own textbook. Nobody is reading the exact same series of stuff week by week, and every week I'm so fascinated to see, is someone going to choose the 22 Goblins unit, and I'm so excited when, 3 students chose to read the Goblins this week. So that's what makes it interesting for me. They're reading stuff that I've read, and their reflections are maybe not going to floor me, but it's so much fun to see in a given cohort of students each week who chooses out of the huge range of stuff to read the specific items that week. That adds a kind of variety for me, because like what Rebecca was saying, students need to be interested, and so do we, right? And that really adds the level of interest for me, getting to see what they choose to read every week instead of everybody reading the same thing.
I think that's really interesting. I'll just add on. I love the idea of using blogging as a reflexive place to gather your thoughts. I think it backs up the science that shows reflexivity will actually increase your learning gains kind of across other courses, so that you're actually coming back and thinking about those things again and again. And I think that actually that will help set up future educators and future faculty in your same programs to have a better group of students who are actually interested in their own learning, because that process of reflecting on, what did I do well last week? What was my, muddiest point? That's my assignment for my reflexive weekly journal. What's the thing that really got me? What did I get tripped up on? Those type of things don't happen in everyday student life. They just take the scrapes and they move on, and they don't necessarily learn anything from that. But giving them an opportunity to just reflect on that week to week is a huge benefit, and one of the best things that I took from my grad program. Some of the faculty really ensconced that in us and said, no, you're going to take a journal every week. Let me know what you're learning, what you're not learning from me, so that I can improve that process. And now it's gospel to me. It's something that I kind of live by. So I think that giving that to students is a wonderful gift, even outside of the course content that we have, letting them know that it's all right to let other people see them struggling with stuff, and that failure is an option. Failure is something that we can learn and grow from, and that I think that public blogging sphere really kind of shows students that it's possible to learn out loud, and it's okay for that.
And they can also thank each other. Like, a big part of building up the community for me is when they learn from each other. It's like, I saw a great storytelling style this week that Amanda used, and I want to use it next week, and that kind of thing that builds the glue that binds one student to another. And that's another super powerful feature of blogging, at least in my classes, is they learn technology from each other, and they also learn storytelling and writing styles from each other. And having a space where they reflect on that each week, it helps them see how they are connected to the other students in the class, even if we don't go into a physical classroom every week together.
So there's a question from Twitter from Laura Ritchie. Not quite sure what the first part is. It says, that online course lady, fear of online upgrading, question mark. consider parallel. Do we as professionals fear being graded? If not, can we model for students?
Right, and I'll just say Laura Ritchie is one of my heroes. Her self-efficacy work is so great. It goes along with growth mindset and reflection, all the stuff we've been talking about. And I would say that a lot of what I do in terms of getting rid of gradings does reflect my own personal resentment about grades. It just seemed, when I was a student, so limiting and so anxiety-producing. So it's not so much about how I as a professional feel now about getting graded, because I don't. Nobody at my school cares about what I do, to be honest, as long as the students are happy and they pass. But I do remember very vividly from my own education times where I got a good grade I knew I didn't deserve, or times where I felt like I had really learned something and the teacher didn't even have a clue what I had learned. And so I'm definitely projecting that past frustration with grading in my basically refusal to grade. I mean, I'm not kidding. I don't put a grade on anything, and I'll share some notes after this about how I've done that, but it's all on the students. They use the LMS. They use quizzes in there, but they're not quizzes of knowledge. They're just true-false quizzes where they record their work completion in the LMS. The points pile up, and I don't touch a thing. I don't do anything. I have tons of interaction with them, but none of it has to do with grading, and that's been incredibly important to me, because how awful would it be if we had this nice conversation here online and then we had to go give each other grades for our participation, or fill out a rubric about what we had done in this virtually connecting session? I mean, that would be such a drag, and because I find it a drag as a teacher, I assume my students will enjoy experimenting with something very different from their other classes. So I highly recommend it. Life without grades is great, in my opinion.
Laura, I'm kind of curious. I know a little bit about your story, but because this is sort of a missed conversation with you, and because I was bummed about the fact that, because I mean, one of the things that I love about you is that I'm really interested in not just the fact that you teach online and the way that you teach online, but also your subject matter, right? I love myth and I love folklore and all of that kind of stuff, and I like hearing those stories and like incorporating in it as metaphor into things that I write sometimes and things like that. So I'm kind of curious, what's your story? How did you come to all this?
Well, I'm trained technically as a classicist, you know, and I came to OU in this very traditional classics department as a very traditional classics professor. And within about 3 or 4 weeks, it was clear they had hired the wrong person. I was not going to be a good fit for that department. Everybody knew it. It was very uncomfortable for everyone concerned. I managed to last for 2 years. But then the dean wanted to start an online course program. And so I resigned my job in the classics department and went to teach for our online course program back in 2003, I guess. And I had the freedom to develop my own courses then, and so I built courses about the things I love. So it's mythology and folklore and Indian epics. And I would love to be teaching Latin and Greek too, but the classics department does not want me to do that. That's okay. I've got plenty of myths and folklore and Indian epics to keep me going. So I feel really lucky, right? I'm someone who could have ended up stuck in a position in a department where I wasn't very happy, but online gave me this opportunity to do something new, build something new, and I just love it, you know. So I've been doing it for such a long time, and I'm so happy with it. It gets better from year to year, and that's why I get so discouraged when I hear people anxious or nervous or doubtful about online education, because at least for me it's been fantastic. It's been a way to share with my students the stuff that I really love, right? And so that's a great opportunity for a teacher. And if you look at the world of mythology and folklore online, all the virtual libraries that are online and the videos and the artwork, it is just astounding. So this summer I'm spending just reading books and exploring resources to share with my students for next year, and I'm having a blast doing it. It's so much fun. So I've got some good cowboy stuff to share with you, Autumn. I've been working on Krishna and the gopis and go Bulls again. So
that was, yeah, because I was doing Western 106, which was all about cowboys, and so I suggested that that Krishna was a cowboy because he is
the mythological cowboy of all time. So yeah, that was our special discovery that you and I figured out.
I don't know if the Western 106 guys got it, but but we got it.
So there's a question in the chat that's actually interesting. So Rebecca writes that online education has been transformative for her. Does anybody use synchronous online? Rebecca, do you want to talk a little bit more about that? I think it's an interesting topic, and I want to talk a little bit about it, but I wanted you to do the intro.
Yeah. I wanted to sort of throw the idea out there because part of what's happened for me this last semester is I'm getting a little bit more pressure to do sync. And I've always traditionally only taught 100% async, and I don't do online office hours because I find them a waste of my time. Students don't come, and then I'm chained to my computer at a specific time where no one shows up, and that drives me crazy. I'm a big fan of time flexibility. I have done more sync, and I'll talk more about it, but I want to get everybody's ideas on the table before I talk about mine, because I want to hear what other people have to say about synchronous in online classes.
I have a similar yet kind of different experience. So when I took over the course instructional design as the lead instructional designer here, I realized that what I'm not is an instructional designer. I don't really do the step-by-step ADDIE process in my day-to-day existence. You know, I'm helping faculty develop online courses, things like that. But so I was pressured also into going sync because that's the way that the class had always been through Blackboard Collaborate as a weekly, hour-long session or whatever. So I did that as the standard course. Granted, it's a grad class, so small sections of about 20 students. And I actually found the online office hours were the best part of the class that the students enjoyed the most. They didn't want to be there for an hour listening to me lecture about a PowerPoint deck that I didn't want to really create in the first place. What they wanted to do is just pick my brain about things day to day that are happening at the university, ways that they can improve their own instruction, things like that. So many of them actually asked, can we just do these virtual sessions as our class? And I said, well, no, I can't do half an hour with 20 of you every week. That's not totally scalable. But I essentially set it up in a way where I wasn't chained to my computer. I had them basically fill out a form, schedule time with me, so that they could get on my calendar for a virtual consult session like that. And it worked out really effectively because I told them I wasn't just going to be there Friday at 10 a.m., but if they had a Friday at 10 a.m. available, they could ask me, are you available, and I'll pop on with them for 15 or 20 minutes, versus just chaining to me on Fridays at 1 o'clock when I'd rather be at the beach or whatever. So in that instance, it really actually worked for me to use Google Hangouts, to use Zoom conferencing, to actually get into their screen, to see projects that they're working on, to be able to give direct feedback in that way. Whereas the online synchronous was an atrocious experience. I don't think I'll ever do that again unless I'm forced to, really because it felt like talking to a blank wall. It's really hard to get students, even really actively engaged students, otherwise online, to do anything other than chat in the chat box. Nobody wanted to turn on their mics. Nobody had their cameras on. It was a very passive experience, and not one that I would like to replicate. So I've kind of moved into synchronous, but only for things like office hours, stuff like that. Otherwise, it's pretty much all asynchronous.
So my experience with synchronous has been heavily framed by my own experiences in synchronous, and I've made a personal vow to not do synchronous unless I have a concrete plan for making it better, because we've had, when I was a student, and granted this is like 8 or 9 years ago, I used to sit in synchronous sessions for 3 hours listening to somebody at the other end, so I'd mute my mic and put my head on the table and just sort of say, why am I here? What am I doing here? This is just repetition. Or worse, you're there with your classmates and your classmates are presenting, but they haven't received any scaffolding on how to do an effective online presentation. So they're hogging the mic for 20 minutes and not really getting to the point, not it's just a really bad experience. So that was my personal vow, and I haven't done any synchronous sessions for class because I haven't cracked that nut yet, but I do something that Phil does, and I tell students, if you need to talk to me, I am available. Let's set up a Skype, a Google Hangout, a phone call, whatever. I'm available synchronous, just tell me and I'll put you on my calendar. Now, Rebecca has done some interesting things in her class, and I'll let her speak to that. But I'm also inspired by Alan, a.k.a. Cogdog Levine, who schedules class time, and if people come, they have a conversation. If they don't, he does like a radio show by himself that's recorded. So that's something that's been in my mind, so maybe I'll tap Autumn on the shoulder and say, let's do the Autumn and AK EdTech show. And if students show up, then we can discuss specific class things. But if not, we'll have the Autumn and AK EdTech show.
That's actually what influenced me in what I did, was Alan's thing, except Alan plus virtually connecting mixed together. But I think it looks like Laura was going to say something, so I'm going to pop out for a second.
Believe it or not, I wasn't. I was just rocking around.
Okay, it looks like you jumped on the screen for a second. Does anyone else want to talk to that before I talk about what I do? Okay.
Oh, I could actually jump in quickly.
Yes.
I'm going to say, just with the nature of what I do, which is teaching graphic design, we have 4 hours of synchronous session every week because they're essentially like studio time. And so, I mean, it's not as terrible as it sounds because it's not, it's not me talking for 4 hours because that would be a nightmare. But I mean, it really is like skills modeling, and like we open up software together. We talk about design process. I talk them through what I'm doing as I'm creating things, and not just the actual like click here, drag this box, move this over, but more like in my mind, I'm thinking, these colors pair well together. This references back to, this design style. Let's quickly switch from where we are to everybody getting into, like the New York Public Library digital imagery kind of repository, and search through that and see how, what I'm creating here is appropriate for this industry, but it's also referencing back all these steps. And so within our sessions together, it's very kind of, I go into it and I'm never really sure what we're going to do for the next 2 hours, but I know kind of like what I hope we're going to hit. And then the students also come in saying like, okay, let's see what Lisa's going to do and where she's going to take us. And, in this kind of collaborative experience, what are we putting together? So it's interesting because with graphic design, we get so much pushback, like you have to be physically together for it to work. But with the video kind of, it's a lot like this. I mean, with that kind of experience, it does seem to work well. But it's also very, because of my context, because of my discipline, because of what I'm teaching, like it's very specific kind of how we structure. But yeah, but I mean, it's fun. It ends up being fun sometimes.
What platform do you use for something that prolonged for a 4-hour session?
We do Zoom, yeah, which is, yeah.
I totally want to have you as a guest in my class, Lisa. That's very interesting.
Yeah, you never know where you'll end up, but somewhere, hopefully.
Anyone else? Want to pop in there? Okay. One of the questions that George asked was sort of like, what makes V-connecting synchronous work? And can't classes be like this? And actually, virtually connecting influenced what I did last semester. My students loved it. I got lots of really great positive feedback. And really, it was a combination of what Alan Levine did when we talked about that DS-106 radio sort of thing. Because he said, well, that's what I do for sync. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just set a time. And I'll say, I'll be online for an hour, and and then I'm like, and then I froze, and I'm like, what the heck am I going to talk about for an hour? And I'm not going to talk to myself for an hour. I'm not a radio show person. Not going to happen. And then I realized, well, virtually connecting works. I'm like, wait a second. And then one of the readings my students had, it was an intro instructional design course, was what do instructional designers do? And then it occurred to me, well, why don't I just bring in a couple of instructional designers and we'll have a conversation about what they do. And so that's what I do in my class with Collaborate. My students very rarely will jump in with video and audio. but they will text questions. And we record it for the students that can't come in because not everybody can make the times that I pick, and I pick it based upon my guests. But I just started bringing in two to four guests, no more than four, usually 2 or 3 guests for each 1 hour class, and it's an optional thing. And we have a conversation, and it's just like this. It is, and actually I'm thinking this might be one that, since it's recorded and everything, that I may actually allow my students to get optional points for watching. But on the other, and I do, because sync is optional, because the class, the way it's set up, in the registrar's office, it's completely async. I can't require my students to be online at a particular time because they may have other commitments. And so I give them, it's like you have 20 points, or you have 20% of their mark is based upon they have to pick two activities each week. And there's a list of activities. And one of them is participate in a sync session. And write your aha moments as to what you got from it. But they were just calling for more and more sync sessions, and so it's like with everybody in the room here. I know Autumn and AK have both guest spoke in my class, been guests in my class, so that I'm always like I'm looking to all of my different friends. But sometimes when I don't have anybody, I've actually just reached out on Twitter and said, hey, does anybody do this? I need somebody, and I've actually ended up bringing people that I've never met before into my classroom to have a conversation about the topic. And it's been really rewarding for everybody involved, right? The students love it, I love it. But I agree, I certainly will never lecture online. I think VoiceThread does a really good job for my slide presentation lecture thingies, and then students can go through it slide by slide at their own pace. That I don't need to do something synchronous that I can do better async. But the conversations certainly work really well sync.
So we've been going for an hour now, and I have a horrible echo. I don't know how that happened. But I guess I just wanted to thank everybody for coming and see if there's any last minute kind of wrap up type questions. We of course can keep going if we want to, but I'll probably end the broadcast here in just a couple of minutes. So any final parting thoughts?
Well, I just want to thank you, Autumn, for doing this, because I was so bummed out that we didn't get to meet in person, but it's so not a big deal if we get to do this. It's really fun.
Thank you so much for doing it, Laura, and coming on and talking to us about what you do, because it's pretty fascinating stuff. So it's been a great conversation all around. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast then. Thank you, anybody who was watching, and we can all say goodbye after I stop the broadcast. So thanks, everyone, for watching.